In this lesson, we're going to have a look at how to make a ball jump. Whenever I need to understand a motion, I find it super easy to reference a video. So in this case, I found a video online of a person jumping. As I script through the video, I'm going to begin looking for keys. Now remember, keys are essential and they're storytelling poses. So to find a key in your video, what you want to do is identify a point where the character stops or changes direction suddenly. Those are quick ways to find keys. So let's fast forward through here. Let's scrub the playhead and notice that the character sort of takes a little kind of mini step forward before ducking down a little bit. So the first key is right here. Standing still is the first key. The second pose I'm going to look at is this squatting pose. And what we've learned so far with anticipation and overshoot is this is the anticipation of the jump or reaching down and gathering energy. And then he's going to push off the ground and shoot quick up into the air and reach the top of that jump. And that's another key. That pose right there is required to tell the story of the jump. So he's standing on the ground, right? At some point, that's the first key. The second key, he's up in the air. And the third key, he's returned to the ground again and back to normal, okay? But from that top jump right here, as we come down, notice when he hits the ground, he has to absorb the jump a little bit. So he squats just slightly, stands back up almost too far, overshoots that position, and then slightly settles back down into a regular pose and begins walking forward again. So the way I go about this now is to open a new document in Krita and just copy this pattern, key, extreme, extreme, key. Using the little example dots there on the left, the video pretty much shows you exactly what the ball will look like. To start with, I'm not going to worry about anything else except for the keys. I'm just going to draw them on consecutive frames and get them in there. With onion skinning off and scrubbing the playhead, I can sort of get a very rough idea, but this is not smooth enough to have a feeling for it yet. And on playback, it's way too fast. So let's try to add some hold frames. I'll animate on 3s just to see where we're at. And I gotta say, it's not really that bad considering how much little work we just did. I kept going and tried 4s and 5s, and I ended up with 5s, although it felt a little bit slow to me. I know that I'm going to spend some time customizing the spacing and timing, so I went with the 5s, but feel free to pick whichever one you're most comfortable with and whichever one feels right to you. That's most important. With keys and extremes in, we have the basics we need for timing, and that's what we're going to focus on next. So what I've done is create a duplicate of my animation and moved one of those to the right. That way I can make changes and immediately compare them to what it used to be like. For this, I'm going to move the entire animation to the right, so I'm going to grab all the keyframes and move them later in the timeline, just a little bit, and duplicate that first frame back at the beginning. The reason is because my animation, when I hit play, it just starts. I'd like it to stand still for a second and then jump. I'm also going to add a little more pause right after the squat and right as the character reaches the apex of the jump for the hang time. Notice how many times I'm playing this back while I'm making these adjustments. Every adjustment or 2 at max, I'm playing it back 5 or 6 times to see what I did. If I don't like the way it changed, I change it right back. And lastly, I like to move the extremes around by putting them really close to a key or really far away from a key or close to the other key and seeing what effect that has on the animation as well. And just from spending 5 or 6 minutes playing around, I end up with an animation that has a little bit more attitude than the first one does. It's not so mechanical and 100% accurate. Animating on 2s or 3s is a good start and a general principle to follow. But at this stage, it doesn't matter that you're on 2s or 5s or 4s. It matters how the animation feels. We can go back later and add more frames to get it to 2s if we need to. But if the animation's smooth at this point, we can just leave it. I'd also like to point out that thanks to the pose-to-pose approach, now I'm up to 44 frames for this animation and I'm still on the 6 original pictures that I drew. This is how flexible the system is. It's not smooth, but it sure does give me an accurate feel for how this is going to work. And I didn't just spend 6 hours drawing 44 frames. Alright, so after playing around, I did pick one that I liked the most, and I made a copy of that as well. So the one that I liked the most just became what I'm going to refer to as my new truth, my first draft now, and I'm going to progress forward from that. So although they're identical, I'm going to start making changes to the second one again so I can compare those differences. Our next step is going to be to add breakdowns. Breakdowns are going to be the keyframes between a key and an extreme, extreme and extreme, or key and a key, or any combination of what we have already. Now, sometimes you don't always need a breakdown. Most of the times you do. But for this animation, I'm going to add one to each section to show you what I mean. The way I have mine animated, my first two keys, the ball is literally standing in the same place. So we don't need a breakdown, because a breakdown really describes how an object moves from one place to the other. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a breakdown between every other key and extreme or combination. And to do this, I'm just going to click on a frame between the two frames, hit duplicate, right click, and turn all those frames to yellow for breakdown. Now, this isn't where they're going to go or when they're going to go, just to get us started so we can see that each transition has a breakdown. We have our timing set, so we know where the ball is going to be and when. We just need to describe how it's going to get there. For this part, I'm going to turn off most of my onion skin except the next frame and the previous frame. You can do that by clicking these little numbers here at the top of your onion skinning window. When adding breakdowns, it's much easier to see the two frames instead of like the 10 before and the 10 after all at once. The first keyframe is the ball at rest, and the second dream we used was the anticipation or the squash before the jump. So this first breakdown is going to be between those two. Now, a lot of people would think, oh, I'll just resize the ball so it's halfway between the two. I'll squash it and stretch it a little bit so it looks like it's the average. And if we do that, we'll be creating constant motion. And it's very rare that we would use constant motion other than something like the sun or a cloud or a robot. So even in these tiny little movements, we use the breakdown to create spacing or easing or slow in and slow out. So think to yourself, as the ball transitions from resting to squash, how is it going to move? Is it going to start quick and slow down? Is it going to start slow and speed up? Even that tiny transition has a little timing chart. And in this case, we're only talking about 3 frames, the key, the extreme, and the breakdown. So a good rule of thumb is to always make the breakdown favor, and favoring means just make it too close to one of the keys in the direction it's going slower in. If you're not sure, try both. But for my animation, I'm going to have it favor the first key or the resting pose. It's going to start off, it's going to go slow, and then speed up into the squish. Now that we know where that frame is in space, we need to think about when that frame is in time. And again, you should move these around to see what you prefer. But if I start off slow and I end up going faster, that last step is the last step. It's the big one. So while I favor the first frame in space, I would actually favor the second frame in time. And again, just using playback like 10 times in a row to see if that's a good choice for me or not. I'm not going to demonstrate on every single in-between that's left. I'm just going to demonstrate on the next one and say that because of my timing, I really leave myself a lot of time here. I have a squash, and then I have one empty frame, which is the breakdown, and then I'm way at the top. When you have a situation like this, where you have to cover this huge gap in one move, it's perfectly natural to reconsider your timing a little bit. So in this case, from the key of the height of the jump all the way to the key at the very end, there's a ton of space in there. So I'm just going to take this key and offset it one more frame to give me a couple frames to play with in here instead of just one frame. That's how I handle issues like that. And since we know where the ball is going to start and where it's going to end and how many steps we have and if it's going to accelerate or decelerate, we can create a timing chart to help us figure this out quickly. In this case, because of the anticipation and buildup of energy, the ball is going to spring off the table and come off quickly and slow down on the way up because of gravity. And because I want some really animated, lifelike motion in here, I'm going to space this with favoring. And since there's only 2 frames, I know one can be here and the other can be even more favored way up here. When favoring this close to another key, sometimes I just like to copy the key and paste it and move it a little bit. If it's that close, it really doesn't have time to change a lot. And on playback for just that section, you can sort of see it just goes really quick and it whips up there fast. This is another great moment to change timing if you need to and adjust spacing as well. If you have more room in your timeline, maybe you want to move breakdowns around, and remember to figure out when they are and not just where they are in time. And that's what this week is about. It's about trying these out, moving things around, experimenting, and seeing what happens. It's really helpful to have these animations and versions side by side to see immediate results. That's what practice will look like this week. So save those practice files as evidence of practice, explain them in the assignment comments, and be sure to point out which final versions you'd like scored. Based on what we've learned this week, I think you should be able to figure out the rest of the jumping ball as well as a whole bunch of other exercises in this week's lessons. Get confident with these skills, understand the basics of keys, extremes, and breakdowns. Use keys to lock in timing, along with extremes like anticipation and overshoot, and let breakdowns define spacing. The distance between any two keyframes is a motion that can be broken down into smaller parts using a timing chart. Experiment with these concepts and play as much as possible, and have a great week animating.